This week happens to mark the 10th anniversary of the Camp David talks. Now, had they managed to reach agreement during those Camp David talks, we probably would have had 10 years of peace, security, and prosperity both for the Palestinians and the Israelis. Sadly, instead of that, we have had 10 very difficult years. We have had many wars. Probably if agreement had been reached, we would not have had the Iraq war, the Afghanistan war, Osama bin Laden, the attack on 9/11, and the present problems that we are facing all over the world. Of course, all Jews abroad feel very strongly about Israel, given their history and the history of suffering, and especially the horrible events during the Holocaust. It is absolutely right that they would like to see an Israel which is in peace and secure and strong. I think the question no longer is about whether Israel. It's about what kind of Israel. Therefore, I think that the Jews abroad should try to help the Israelis not as uncritical supporters of everything that they do, but as wise and critical friends to try to move them towards some sort of settlement with the Palestinians. Equally, a lot of Arabs and Muslims feel very strongly about the Palestinians, and they too, instead of encouraging extremism, should try to see if they can bring some sort of moderation among the Palestinians and bring them to reach an agreement with the Israelis. The problems that Israelis and the Palestinians are suffering from, contrary to the normal perception, is not really one of their own making. A lot of their problems stem from events abroad and outside their control. After the First World War, the Arabs and the Palestinians were promised a great deal to have independence, to have countries of their own, which was unfortunately not fulfilled. It was about the same time when the anti-Semitism came also to a height in Europe, which culminated in the dreadful events of the Holocaust. And therefore the Palestinians and the Israelis both suffer from the legacy of colonialism in the case of Palestinians and of anti-Semitism in the case of the Jews. But neither of them were responsible for these ills. So both of them should realize that they are victims of problems outside their control rather than problems which have been inflicted on them by the other side. But as a legacy of these events, still there is a very strong anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist feeling among the Palestinians. And sadly, when you talk to a lot of Israelis, you see that they speak with contempt, with disgust about the Palestinians, almost verging on racism. And what is important for both sides is to understand the other side's point of view. When you travel to Palestine, you really see that you feel sorry for both sides. Both of them are victims and feel threatened by the other side. And therefore, a solution should be reached that makes both sides feel secure. One of the reasons maybe why a solution has not been reached between Palestinians and Israelis is that America has been in the driving seat and tries to impose its view on the conflict. While many Arabs and Muslims and Palestinians do not believe that America is an honest broker. Therefore, probably what is needed is a more impartial groups of countries, maybe under UN, which would look at the problems dispassionately and can be trusted by both sides so that they can bring some resolution to the conflict. There are many voices, both in Israel and in America, for an attack on Iran. I believe that this would be very unwise because we are already suffering from the consequences of the invasion of Afghanistan 9 years later, and the situation is worse. Nearly 1 million people have been killed in Iraq and still the problems persist. So another invasion of a much bigger and more powerful country would really send the whole of the Middle East, including Israel, into tremendous turmoil. I think what is needed is to try and think of constructive ways of engaging Iran in a dialogue and trying to resolve the nuclear issue through peaceful means. Iranians, of course, say that Israel possesses nuclear weapons, while Iran is forbidden from even enriching uranium. On the other hand, the Israelis say that if Iran gains nuclear weapons, it will become an existential threat to Israel. Last October, European countries and Iran reached a landmark agreement in Vienna that Iran would give about 1,200 kilos of its low-enriched uranium to Russia to be further enriched to 20%, given to France to be turned into fuel rods for Iran's nuclear reactor. Now, at that time, Iran welcomed it. And in fact, President Ahmadinejad was one of the people most enthusiastic about it. But many voices were raised in Iran against it, because they said, what guarantee do we have that the result of all our efforts over many years, that we would get the fuel rods back? And so Iran said, either it should be done in batches, or the exchange should take place on Iranian territory. The West, of course, rejected it. But just recently, on the 17th of May, Brazil and Turkey reached an agreement which was almost identical with the agreement a few months previously, but with one difference, that Iran would send its 1,240 kilos of low-enriched uranium to Turkey for safekeeping under the IAEA, and once the fuel rods were given to Iran, they would be released. This was rejected by America and Secretary Clinton the following day, in fact before the ink was dry on the agreement, said that we have to push for more sanctions against Iran, and of course since then they have passed another series of sanctions against Iran. I think that still there is a great deal in that agreement, and before we push towards military action and make the situation much worse than it is, we think, as I said, of constructive ways of achieving the end which everybody wants. That Iran gets enrichment, but also the West becomes certain that Iran will not get nuclear weapons. I think it's only through dialogue and through constructive means that this problem can be solved. Otherwise, the whole Middle East would be thrown into chaos and confusion.